The hot metal tongs hit my hand, and the photo of my husband shattered. My daughter-in-law, Brenda, hissed at me. My son, Mark, just frowned at his laptop, annoyed by the interruption. They think I am a useless, penniless widow. They think I have nothing. They don't know Arthur left me a kingdom, and they just handed me the keys. My name is Eleanor Vance. I am 62 years old, and I am standing in a kitchen that feels more like a surgical theatre than a home. It is all white lacquer, stainless steel, and cold, polished marble. This is my son's kitchen, in his Austin penthouse, and it has never felt like anything less than a prison. I was holding the small, silver-plated frame, the last one I had left. Inside was Arthur, his eyes crinkling at the corners, his favourite grey sweater. He has been gone for 8 months. 8 months since the sudden, shocking silence of his heart giving out. I was wiping a smudge of grease, probably one of my own fingerprints, from the glass, trying to see him clearly. The sound of the elevator door opening, followed by the sharp, angry click of stilettos on the marble floor, made my shoulders tense instantly. Brenda, she didn't even drop her briefcase. She stormed into the kitchen, her face tight with a fury that was always simmering just beneath the surface. She was a top executive at Oracle Analytics, a fact she mentioned at least 5 times a day. Today, her blonde hair was pulled back so tightly it looked painful. "Did you schedule the pickup from the Gilded Hangar?" she snapped. "No hello?" Never a hello. I placed the photo frame down on the massive quartz island. "I'm sorry. Brenda, I forgot. It slipped my mind." Her laugh was like breaking glass. "Slipped your mind? It's the one thing I asked you to do. One thing. Is your brain finally turning to mush? Eleanor, do we need to put you in a home?" I felt the familiar, hot prickle of shame, but I held my ground. My voice was quiet, but steady. There was no need for that tone. "Brenda, no need." She slammed her aluminum water bottle onto the counter. "I have a $30 million account review tomorrow, and I have nothing to wear because my mother-in-law, the freeloader, can't handle a single, simple task. You are a burden, Eleanor, a leech. Do you have any idea what it costs to keep you here?" I looked at my son, Mark, sitting at the far end of the island. He was, as always, glued to his laptop. He heard her. He had to have heard her. He was only feet away, but he just tapped faster on his keyboard, his shoulders hunched. I turned back to Brenda, my hands clasped in front of me. "Arthur wouldn't have wanted me to bother you." It was the wrong thing to say. Mentioning Arthur, mentioning his wishes, was like throwing gasoline on her internal fire. Her eyes narrowed to slits. "Arthur?" She hissed the name like it was a curse. "Don't you dare talk about him. That pathetic old man." She moved before I could react. She wasn't aiming for me, not directly. She was aiming for the photo, but she was clumsy in her rage. She snatched the heavy, stainless steel tongs from the utensil holder on the stove, the ones I had just used to make her dinner, and swung them. The hot metal slammed against the back of my hand. Pain, sharp and searing, shot up my arm. It was a reflex. My hand opened. The little silver frame clattered to the floor. The sound of the glass shattering was deafening in the sterile silence of the kitchen. "Look what you made me do!" she shrieked, though it was her who had done it. She pointed at the floor, at the broken glass and the image of my husband. now exposed and lying on the cold marble. He left you nothing. Brenda snarled, her face inches from mine, her breath smelling of stale coffee and ambition. Nothing. You are nothing without us. I looked at Mark. He finally looked up, his expression not of horror or defense, but of simple, pathetic annoyance. "Mum," he said, his voice a weary whine. "Just stop making Brenda mad. Please, I'm on a call." He turned back to his screen. My hand was throbbing. Tears welled in my eyes, blurring the scene. The pain was real, but it was distant. I knelt, slowly, my old knees cracking in protest. I began to pick up the larger shards of glass, careful not to slice my fingers. Brenda scoffed, a victorious, ugly sound. She grabbed her water bottle and stalked off toward her home office. Mark continued his typing. They left me there, kneeling in the wreckage. I picked up the photograph itself. Arthur's smiling face was undamaged. I brushed a tiny splinter of glass from his cheek. They thought I was crying from the pain, or the humiliation. They thought they had broken me. I held the shard of glass in my palm. Under the harsh glare of the under-cabinet lighting, I let the corner of my mouth lift. I hid the expression as I bent my head, pretending to weep. "You don't know?" I thought. "You don't know anything at all." My room, the one they called the guest suite, was a 10-foot by 8-foot storage space behind the laundry appliances. It had no windows. The air was thick and still, carrying the faint, chemical smell of cedar moth blocks and the expensive, floral detergent Brenda insisted upon. This was where I retreated after I had cleaned up the last of the broken glass. This was my world now. It was so different from the one I had shared with Arthur. Our life had not been grand, not by the gleaming, heartless standards of New Austin. We were not wealthy. We were comfortable. Our home was a modest brick ranch in a quiet suburb, the kind with a sprawling oak tree out front and floors that creaked in familiar places. It smelled of old books and Arthur's pipe tobacco. Arthur himself was a quiet man, a humble software engineer. He was good with numbers and systems. He worked for a small, almost invisible consulting firm, Nexus Solutions. He never brought his work home, never boasted about his projects. He would just say he helped companies organize their data. He was a steady, warm presence, a foundation I had built my life on for 35 years. When his heart suddenly stopped 8 months ago, that foundation crumbled into dust. Mark and Brenda swept in before the dust had even settled. I was still sitting in the stunned silence of the house, trying to remember how to make coffee for one, when they arrived. "Mom," Mark said. He sat beside me on the sofa Arthur and I had picked out together. His hand rested on my arm, but it felt cold, lacking any real warmth. "You can't stay here alone. It's too big for you. It's not safe." His voice had that smooth, persuasive tone he used for his work, the one that always sounded practiced. Brenda sat opposite us, her expression a careful mask of sympathy. "We want you to come live with us. Eleanor, in the penthouse. We can take care of you." I was too tired to argue, too hollowed out by grief. "We'll sell the house," Mark continued, his voice picking up speed. "It's a great time to sell. You can put the money away." "We'll set up a trust for you," Brenda interjected, her smile bright and artificial. "I'll manage it myself. I have a fantastic financial advisor. We'll make sure that money grows. You won't have to worry about a thing ever again." I agreed. I signed the papers they put in front of me. I watched as strangers packed up 35 years of my life. Most of it, they decided, wouldn't fit the aesthetic of the penthouse and was carted off to a storage unit. I was never given the key. The trust was the first lock on the cage. Brenda took the entire proceeds from my home, a significant sum, and it vanished into an account I could not access. "It's all invested. Eleanor," she'd say, tapping her phone. "Working for you." But I never saw a statement. I never saw a cent. Instead, I became their unpaid staff. My days started at 5:30 in the morning, long before they woke, to brew the acidic, expensive coffee Brenda favoured. I cleaned the vast expanses of white marble. I did their laundry, separating Brenda's delicate silk blouses and athletic wear, which cost more than my entire old wardrobe. I cooked their elaborate, organic meals, which they often criticised too much salt, not enough kale, the wrong kind of quinoa. My life became a cycle of domestic service, confined to the walls of their glass tower. Mark, my son, simply erased me. He was absorbed in his own ascent at Oracore, a high-paying job Brenda had graciously arranged for him. He was addicted to the lifestyle she provided: the new cars, the expensive dinners, the veneer of success. He needed her, and he was terrified of her. So when she spoke to me with contempt, he stared at his phone. When she belittled my cooking, he agreed with her. The worst nights were the parties. Brenda hosted often, filling the penthouse with loud, shallow people who worked in tech and finance. On those nights, I was explicitly required to serve. I would move through the crowd with trays of appetizers I had spent all day preparing. Brenda would introduce me with a dismissive little laugh. "This is just Mark's mom, Eleanor. She's staying with us for a while. She loves to help out." And then, once the main wave of food was served, she would find me in the kitchen. "That's enough. Eleanor," she would say, not unkindly, but with the firm finality one uses on a disobedient dog. "You can go to your room now. We'll be having important discussions." I would retreat to my windowless box, listening to the muffled thumping of the music and the bursts of forced laughter, while I ate the leftover scraps. I became small. I became quiet. But I did not become weak. I watched. I listened. I filed away every insult, every condescending glance, every time my son chose his wife's comfort over his mother's dignity. I remembered everything. The cruelty began to escalate, moving from verbal cuts to a kind of systematic erasure. The few small boxes I had been allowed to bring from my home, the ones kept in my windowless room, were picked apart. First, it was Arthur's old watch, the one with the worn leather strap that he wore every day. I kept it on the small nightstand. One morning, after I had cleaned the entire apartment, I returned to my room to find it gone. "Brenda, have you seen Arthur's watch?" I asked, my stomach tight. She didn't even look up from her phone. "Oh, that old thing, I think it fell in the trash when I was helping you tidy up. The garbage was collected this morning. It's gone. It was probably broken anyway," she said, helping me tidy up, as if she had ever once set foot in my room to do anything other than criticize. A week later, my small, cherished stamp collection, a silly thing Arthur and I had started, vanished from my closet shelf. It was replaced by a stack of Brenda's old designer shoeboxes. She claimed to have no idea what I was talking about. The malice was so casual, so effortless. I was becoming a ghost in their home, and they were disposing of my history, piece by piece. One afternoon, while I was scrubbing the glass shower door in the master bathroom, I heard Brenda in the bedroom, speaking on the phone. Her voice was bright and arrogant. No, it was honestly so easy. She laughed. Mark was squeamish, but I just told him it was the only smart move. The old house sold. The money, it's handled. It's all in one of my high-yield accounts. She'll never see it. She thinks she has a trust. It's hilarious. She's completely dependent, which is how it should be. A cold dread mixed with a white-hot rage settled in my stomach. I stopped scrubbing. I just stood there, listening to her brag about my own financial ruin. That night, Brenda was at a late work event. Mark was home alone, something that rarely happened. He was drinking, not sipping a glass of wine, but working his way through a bottle of expensive whiskey, his tie undone, his face pale and slack. I was in the kitchen, wiping down the counters, preparing to go to my room. "She's a monster, you know," he slurred, staring into his glass. I froze. "Mark." "Brenda." He looked up at me, and for a second, I saw the boy I raised, not the hollow man he had become. His eyes were bloodshot and filled with a desperate self-loathing. "She runs everything. Mom, my job, my bonus, this apartment. She knows everything I do. I hate this job. I hate all of this. I'm trapped." He was crying, silent, drunken tears rolling down his cheeks. My heart ached. A sharp, maternal instinct I thought had died. I sat down across from him. "Mark, you can leave. You can start over. We could—" "How?" He spat, the weakness turning back to anger. "You don't understand. She has everything tied up. She would ruin me. She would take everything." "She already has." "Mark," I said, my voice soft. He was about to answer when we heard the sound of the elevator, then the key in the door. It was Brenda. I have never seen a man change so fast. He physically recoiled, wiping his face, straightening his tie, kicking the whiskey bottle under the island counter with his foot. "Hey, babe," he called out, his voice a forced, cheerful tenor. "Just finishing up some work." Brenda walked in, saw me sitting there, and her eyes narrowed. "What is she doing still up?" "Nothing. Mom was just getting a glass of water." "Mark Stamdy." I looked at him. He wouldn't meet my gaze. The boy was gone. The man who sat there was a coward, completely and irrevocably broken. He was her creature. The final straw came a few days later. Brenda owned a dozen different tablets and devices. One of her older ones, an iPad, lay discarded on a shelf. I had started using it in the evenings, in my room, to read free e-books from the public library. It was my only escape. She found me with it. I was reading, sitting on my small bed, when she burst into the room without knocking. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded. I'm just reading." "Brenda, it was an old one you weren't using." "That is my property," she screamed, her face turning a blotchy red. "My property. You don't get to touch my things. You are a guest here." "No, you're not even a guest. You're charity." She snatched the tablet from my hands, and in a fit of pure, childish rage, she turned and hurled it against the wall. It shattered, the screen spiderwebbing, the impact just inches from my head. I flinched, a piece of plastic striking my cheek. She stood there, breathing heavily, chest heaving. She looked at the broken device, then at me. There was no remorse, only satisfaction. "Now you have nothing to read," she said, and walked out. I sat there, not moving, for a long time. The last ember of hope I had for my son, the last shred of my old self, died in that room. He was not trapped. He was a willing participant. He was unsalvageable. And I was done. 2 days later, I was bringing Brenda her morning coffee in her home office. She was frantic, stressed about a big presentation. Her desk was covered in thick, bound documents, stamped confidential, Oracore internal. She never should have had them at home. I set the mug down, and my hand jerked. My hand, which still had a faint, yellowing bruise from the tongs. Black coffee surged over the rim, washing over a stack of financial projections. "You clumsy, idiotic old fool!" she shrieked, jumping up. "These are vital. Get out, get out." "I'm so sorry. Brenda, let me help you clean it up," I said, my voice trembling with fake panic. "No, get out, you'll only make it worse." I backed out of the room, but I had seen them, spread out to dry on her blotter, pages detailing project budgets and vendor payments. I waited an hour, until I heard her on a loud, angry conference call in the living room. I slipped back into her office. My hands were perfectly steady. I took my cheap burner phone, the only thing I owned that they didn't know about, and I photographed every single page, especially the ones with signatures and wire transfer details. I photographed them all. I got to my feet, the shards of glass digging into my palm. I clutched the photograph of Arthur tightly in my fist. My hand throbbed from the impact of the hot tongs, a dull, aching heat. Mark had returned to his laptop, pretending to be absorbed in a spreadsheet. Brenda was breathing hard, energized by her own violence, watching me, waiting for the tears. I looked at her, at the expensive, artificially smooth face, the hard eyes. I let the pain in my hand travel up my arm, but I did not let it into my voice. "You will pay for this, Brenda." It was quiet. It was flat. It was a promise. She stared at me for a second, stunned by the lack of hysteria, and then she threw her head back and laughed. It was a terrible, barking sound that had no joy in it. "Pay!" she shrieked, the sound bouncing off the cold marble. "Pay with what your social security are you threatening me? You senile old woman, you have nothing. You are nothing. You still don't get it. Do you?" She loved this, the performance of it. She grabbed her smartphone from the counter, tapping the glass screen aggressively with her long, manicured fingernail. "You think you're some tragic figure, that Arthur left you some secret fortune. He left you with debt. Eleanor, he left you with me." She shoved the phone in my face, so close I had to step back. Look at your trust fund, the money from your precious little house." It was a banking app. The account was titled Eleanor Vance Trust. The balance was displayed in large, clear numbers, $50.12. "That's what's left," Brenda sneered, pulling the phone back. "We've been using it. Your living expenses are shockingly high. Eleanor, the food you eat, the electricity you use, the space you take up. It all costs money. You've officially drained yourself. You are, quite literally, worthless." I looked at Mark, my son. He was watching this. He saw the balance. He heard her words. He knew she was showing me that they had consumed my entire past, the equity of my 35-year marriage. He said nothing. He just stared at his screen, his jaw clenched. A coward, pretending he was merely a bystander. My silence, my refusal to crumble. seemed to enrage Brenda more. "Get that pathetic look off your face," she snapped. "I'm sick of looking at you. I've been sick of you since you got here. I want you out. Tonight?" "Brenda," Mark said, his voice a low, weak protest. "It's after midnight. Where would she—" "Shut up, Mark," she screamed. "I am done. I want her gone. Now." She turned back to me, her eyes glinting with a new, cruel idea. "Here's the choice. Eleanor, you walk out that door right now, on your own, or you stay, and I call the police." I frowned. "The police?" "Yes," she said, savouring the word. "I'll tell them my senile mother-in-law had a psychotic break, that she attacked me, that she broke this glass." She gestured to the floor, to the mess she had made. "Who do you think they'll believe? Eleanor, a respected executive at Oracle, or a confused, penniless old woman who doesn't even have $1 to her name? I will have you put in a state-run home. I will have you committed. Do you understand me?" The threat hung in the sterile air, heavy and toxic. She would do it. I knew she would. I looked at Mark one last time. Mark. He couldn't meet my gaze. He pushed his chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. He didn't defend me. He didn't argue. He walked past me to the hall closet and pulled out the small, cheap fabric suitcase I had arrived with, the one they never let me fully unpack. He went into my windowless room. I heard the sound of drawers opening, the rustle of clothes. He was throwing my few possessions into the bag, my old cardigans, my soft-soled shoes, the few things that remained of my former life. He returned, zipping the bag. The sound was horribly final. He placed it at my feet, by the front door. He still wouldn't look at me. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. His hands were shaking. He fumbled with the bills, pulling out everything he had. It was a small, pathetic wad of cash. "Mum," he whispered, forcing the money into my uninjured hand. "It's $200. It's all I have on me. It's all I can do." He finally looked at me, his eyes pleading, but not for my forgiveness. He was pleading for me to leave, to make this confrontation stop. "Go to a motel," he said, his voice cracking. "Get a room for the night. Just don't call us. Please, don't call." $200, the buyout for a lifetime of motherhood. Brenda stood by the kitchen island, arms crossed, a tight, victorious smirk on her face. "Get out," she said. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't cry. I looked at my son, the stranger with my husband's eyes. I looked at his wife, the monster he had chosen. I fixed their faces in my mind, committing every detail of my own execution to memory. I bent down, picked up the suitcase, and walked out the door. The elevator doors opened with a silent whoosh. The digital clock on the penthouse wall as I stepped out read 2:14 a.m. I was 62 years old. I was homeless. I was in my slippers, holding $200 and a cheap suitcase. And as the elevator doors sealed me in, I clutched the photo of Arthur in my pocket. I was utterly alone, and I was finally, terrifyingly, free. The $200 Mark gave me got me 3 nights. The first was in a motel by the highway that smelled of old smoke and bleach. The man behind the bulletproof glass looked at me in my slippers and worn cardigan, looked at the cash, and charged me $80. I lay on the stiff, stained comforter and did not sleep. I just stared at the ceiling. The throbbing in my hand, a dull metronome counting down the seconds of my old life. When the money from the first motel ran out, I found a cheaper one, the kind that rented by the hour. I stayed for 2 nights. I ate crackers from a vending machine. The remaining $60 bought me a bus ticket to a part of town I didn't recognize and left me with almost nothing. I ended up at a shelter, a loud, cavernous room filled with the sounds of coughing and quiet weeping. I was no longer Eleanor Vance. I was just a bed number. I ate thin soup in a plastic bowl and clutched my suitcase, which held nothing of value except the burner phone with the photographs. I learned to make myself small, to not make eye contact, to become invisible. It was easy to become invisible. That was the most shocking part. At 62, in shabby clothes, with the haunted look of the newly destitute, people do not see you. They look through you, around you, as if you are a piece of furniture, a part of the landscape of urban decay. Bus drivers, students, police officers. I was nothing, a ghost. After 3 nights at the shelter, a fight broke out, and I was told I had to move on. My time was up. For 2 nights, I sat on a bench in a small city park. The Austin nights were cool, and the chill seeped into my bones. I did not sleep. I watched the shadows, and I planned. I did not cry. Crying was a luxury. Crying was for the woman I used to be. The woman who knelt on the floor was dead. The thing that sat on that park bench was something else entirely. It was a cold, hard knot of calculation. My rage was not a hot, explosive thing like Brenda's. It was a block of ice. I thought about the photos on my phone. I thought about Brenda's sneer. I thought about Mark's averted eyes. I thought about the $50.12. I had $14 left. On the 3rd morning, I spent $4 on a cup of coffee and a pastry, the first warm food I'd had in days. I spent 2 more on a bus fare. I took it to the main branch of the public library. It was warm inside. It was quiet. It smelled of paper and floor polish. It was the first safe place I had been in 2 weeks. I sat at a computer terminal for an hour, letting the feeling return to my frozen fingers. I didn't go online. I didn't search for help or homeless services. I had a plan. I went to the payphones near the lobby. I had one number, a number Arthur had made me memorize years ago, right after Mark had married Brenda. "It's my failsafe, Ellie," he'd said, tapping his head. "Julian Hayes, in Dallas. Remember that name. Remember this number. Just in case." I never knew what just in case meant. Now I did. I used my last $8 in coins to make a long-distance call to Dallas. My hand was shaking, not from cold, but from a terrible, clarifying purpose. A crisp, professional voice answered. "Law offices of Hayes, Blackwood, and Associates. I need to speak to Mr. Julian Hayes," I said. My voice was hoarse. "May I ask who is calling?" "My name is Eleanor Vance, Mrs. Arthur Vance." The silence on the other end was sudden and profound. I heard a muffled sound, a hand covering the receiver. "Put her through. Now." A click, and then a new voice, a deep, resonant baritone. "This is Julian Hayes. Who am I speaking to?" "This is Eleanor Vance. My husband was Arthur Vance. Mrs. Vance." The voice was electric with shock. "My God. Eleanor. Is it really you? We've been looking for you for 8 months. We've had private investigators. We've checked registries. Where are you?" "I'm at the Austin Public Library," I said. "I'm on a payphone." "The library." He paused, processing. "Are you Are you all right? No, Mr. Hayes. I am not all right. My son and daughter-in-law threw me out. They stole my house. I have nothing. Another silence. This one was different. It was cold. Mrs. Vance, he said, his voice dropping. I am so sorry. Arthur was worried this might happen. He was worried about Mark's weakness. But you need to understand. You don't have nothing. Your husband didn't just leave you a will. He left you an empire. I leaned against the wall, the hard plastic receiver slick in my hand. I don't understand. You don't need to. Not yet. Where are you? The main branch on Guadalupe. Yes. Do not move. Do not talk to anyone. I am sending a car. It will be there in 30 minutes. It is a black Bentley. The driver's name is Thomas. He will take you to a secure location, and I will be on the next flight from Dallas. Do you understand me? Eleanor. A Bentley. Yes, he said, and I could hear the anger in his voice now. Arthur was my best friend, and he was one of the richest, quietest men in Texas. And you are his sole heir. Now stay put. He hung up. I stood by the phone, trembling. 25 minutes later, the long, black, gleaming car pulled up to the curb. It was silent as a shadow, a 10-ton spaceship landing in front of the library. People stopped to stare. The students, the homeless men I had sat with. They all watched as a man in a black suit got out, looked around, and spotted me. He walked over. He did not look at my stained cardigan or my slippers. He looked me in the eye. Mrs. Vance, he asked, his voice polite. Yes, I whispered. He took the cheap suitcase from my hand. He opened the impossibly heavy back door. Mr. Hayes is expecting you. I slid onto the soft, cool leather. The door closed with a solid, definitive thud, sealing out the world, the noise, the poverty, the invisibility. The car pulled away from the curb, and I did not look back. The Bentley had taken me to a private, unmarked building in downtown Austin, one of those glass towers that reflected the sky. I was shown to a suite on the top floor. There. I was given privacy. I showered for 30 minutes, scrubbing the grime and the shame of the shelter from my skin. Clean clothes were waiting for me. Simple, elegant, and expensive. When I was ready, I was escorted into a conference room that overlooked the entire city. Julian Hayes was not what I expected. He was tall, impeccably dressed, and had the sharp, clear eyes of a man who missed nothing. He was perhaps Arthur's age, but he carried an energy that was decades younger. He stood when I entered and held my gaze with a profound, sorrowful respect. There was no pity. There was only anger. Eleanor, he said, and his voice was the one from the phone, deep and steady. I cannot tell you how sorry I am that it took us this long to find you. Arthur and I were friends for over 20 years. He gestured to the leather chair opposite his. On the vast mahogany desk between us, there was only a single, thick, leather-bound folder. And I am going to tell you the truth. Eleanor, he said, sitting down. The truth your husband protected you from, and the truth he armed you with. I just nodded, my hands folded in my lap. First, he said, leaning forward. Arthur was not a simple software engineer. That was a cover, a lifestyle he enjoyed. He was a deeply private man, as you know. What you didn't know was that he was, perhaps, one of the most brilliant investors of his generation. He let that sink in. The company he worked for, Nexus Solutions. It was his private holding company, his personal consulting firm. It was the hub he used to manage an investment portfolio that spans technology, real estate, and biotech. Arthur was exceptionally wealthy. I thought of our little brick house, our simple vacations, his old, worn-out sweaters. He didn't want the money to change you, Hayes continued, as if reading my mind. Or to change Mark. He feared what wealth would do to his family. It appears, he added, his voice hardening. He was right to be afraid, at least about his son. He opened the folder. Which brings me to this. 25 years ago, Arthur and two partners built a small data sorting algorithm. Arthur was the lead architect. The other two handled the business side. Over time, that algorithm became the foundation for a very, very large corporation. A corporation called Oracle Analytics. The name hit me like a physical blow. Brenda's company. Yes, Hayes said, seeing the recognition in my eyes. Arthur cashed out most of his stake years ago, content to live quietly, but he was a sentimentalist, and he was a genius. He didn't just sell. He kept one, very specific piece of the company. He called it his Golden Founder's Share. He slid a single piece of paper across the desk. This share is unique. It entitles the holder to 15% of all company profits. But more than that, it grants the holder a permanent, non-terminable voting seat on the Oracle board of directors. My head was spinning. But Arthur never used it. Hayes finished. He was a silent partner. The seat remained dormant, but the share had one final clause, a clause Arthur himself wrote. Upon his death, the share and the board seat were not to be dissolved. They were to be activated and transferred, immediately and irrevocably, to his sole heir, to you, Eleanor Vance. I stared at him. Me, a board member. You are not just a board member, Eleanor, Hayes said, his voice sharp as a blade. You are now, as of 8 months ago, the single largest individual shareholder in the company. The board has been in chaos, wondering who you were, why you hadn't claimed your seat. They've been operating with a vacant chair, and we've been stalling them, trying to find you. He finally allowed a thin, cold smile. While your son and daughter-in-law were treating you like a servant, they were living in a penthouse and working for a corporation that, in significant part, you own. He closed the folder. The sound was a definitive, heavy thud. Here is the reality of your situation. Eleanor, Mark and Brenda sold your house, which was solely in your name, by fraudulent means. That is a felony. They transferred the proceeds into an account controlled by Brenda, which is embezzlement. That is another felony. And for the last 8 months, Brenda has been drawing a 6-figure salary, and no doubt a very large bonus, from a company where you are now her boss. A company, I might add, that she is not supposed to be removing confidential financial documents from. I looked down at my hands. The bruise from the tongs was a faint, ugly yellow. They thought you were worthless, Hayes said, his voice laced with cold fury. They thought he left you with $50. Arthur left you an arsenal. The only question now, Mrs. Vance, is how you wish to deploy it. Julian Hayes did not take me to a hotel. When our business was concluded, he escorted me back to the Bentley. We drove for 10 minutes. We stopped in front of a different tower, one of older, more solid architecture. stone and dark glass. Arthur kept a residence here for over 20 years, Hayes explained as the elevator ascended, operated by a private key. He used it as his real office, his private study. He never told Mark. He never told anyone. The doors opened directly into the apartment. It was the complete opposite of Mark and Brenda's penthouse. Where theirs was a sterile, white box designed to impress strangers, this was a fortress of substance. Dark wood bookshelves lined every wall, filled with actual books. The furniture was leather and heavy silk, solid and comfortable. It smelled of old paper and cedar. It was Arthur. "This is yours now, Eleanor. All of it." The first thing I did was walk to a mirror. I saw the woman who had been kicked out, the woman in the ill-fitting, donated clothes. I saw the grey, limp hair, the pale skin, the fear still lingering in the eyes. I was a ghost. "I am not Eleanor anymore," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet room. "Eleanor was a victim. Eleanor is gone." The next morning, I began the transformation. It was not about vanity. It was about armor. I brought in the best hairstylist in Austin. She cut away the thin, straggling hair and shaped what was left into a sharp, elegant style. The grey was no longer mousy. It was silver, like a polished blade. I had a tailor come to the apartment. We did not shop. We designed. The soft cardigans and worn-out slippers were boxed and incinerated. In their place, custom-made wool and silk trousers, sharp-shouldered blazers, and blouses of a quality that made Brenda's designer labels look like fast fashion. I was fitted for shoes with a solid, hard heel, the kind that made a sound when you walked. I instructed everyone, from the tailor to Mr. Hayes, to address me as Mrs. Vance. For the next 14 days, that penthouse became a command center. I did not rest. I did not mourn. I worked. Hayes and his team of lawyers and forensic accountants arrived every morning at 8. We turned Arthur's grand dining table into a war room. They brought me volumes on corporate law, on Oracor's bylaws, on the other members of the board. I was a fast learner. I had spent my life organizing information. This was just a different kind of library. We analyzed the company's performance. "Brenda is seen as a star," Hayes reported. "She's head of new project development. She's credited with landing several major, highly profitable new clients. She's also reckless," I said. I walked to the safe where I had placed the burner phone. I retrieved it and handed it to the head forensic accountant. "I took these photographs. She was careless. She brought confidential company files home, and I spilled coffee on them." The accountant plugged the phone into a laptop. The images I had taken, the spreadsheets, the project codes, the vendor lists filled the screen. The accountant, a woman with eyes as sharp as Hayes's, zoomed in on a name. Project Labyrinth. I've seen this. It's one of her biggest successes. But the vendor payments. "What is it?" Hayes asked. "The vendors are shells," she said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "The incorporation dates are all within the last 6 months. The payments are being routed offshore." She looked up, her face pale. "This isn't just sloppy. This is outright fraud." "Who else signs off?" I asked. "The chief financial officer," the accountant said. "Alan Richter. He'd have to be in on it." Hayes, who had been quiet, picked up his own phone. He dialed his private investigator. "Richter. Alan Richter. I want his complete pattern of life. Hotels, dinners, private meetings. Yes." Now. The answer came back in less than 3 hours. Alan Richter and Brenda Vance were not just colleagues. They were lovers. They were meeting twice a week at a boutique hotel. So, I said, looking at the flowchart we had created, my daughter-in-law is not just an adulterer. She's a thief. She and her lover are systematically embezzling millions of dollars from my company, using fake projects to do it. Hayes nodded, a grim satisfaction on his face. This is the weapon. Her salary, her bonuses, the apartment. It's all funded by this fraud, and the documents you secured are the key. Then we start, I said. Not just with the board. We start with my house. Hayes smiled. The legal team is already filing the motion. A civil suit for the fraudulent sale of your home and the embezzlement of the proceeds. With this new evidence of criminal activity, the judge will not hesitate. We will file for an emergency injunction to freeze all their assets. By tomorrow morning, Brenda and Mark won't be able to buy a cup of coffee. I stood and walked to the window, looking down at the city lights. I was no longer the woman on the park bench. I was Mrs. Vance, and I was ready for the board meeting. The first strike was silent and entirely legal. Hayes filed the civil suit on a Tuesday morning. The complaint was a masterpiece of cold, legal fury fraud, embezzlement, conversion of assets, and financial elder abuse. Attached to the filing was an emergency petition to freeze all known assets belonging to Mark and Brenda Vance, pending the outcome of the litigation. The judge signed the injunction at 9:05 a.m., Hayes informed me, his voice calm over the phone. Their bank accounts, their joint brokerage account, and the title to the penthouse are, as of this moment, completely frozen. They cannot access a single cent. I imagined it. I imagined Brenda at her favorite $1,000-a-head restaurant, trying to pay for lunch with her fellow executives. I pictured the polite, condescending smile of the waiter as he returned her declined card. I pictured her frantic, angry, tapping on her phone, her calls to the bank, her voice getting higher and more shrill, the first crack in her perfect, lacquered facade. Mark would be useless. He would panic, look to her for an answer, and she would have none. They would assume it was a bank error, a technical glitch. They would never, not for a second, assume it was the old woman they had thrown out in her slippers. Their arrogance was their greatest weakness. While they were reeling from that first, invisible blow, the real work was happening in the shadows. Brenda and her lover, Alan Richter, were still operating at Oracle. They were still confident, still believed they were the smartest people in the room, still believed their tracks were covered. They had no idea that a company Arthur had acquired 15 years ago, a discreet but lethal forensic accounting firm called Bedrock Analysis, was now crawling through every server, every email, and every transaction at Oracle. They were ghosts, specialists in digital warfare. They were my ghosts. The team worked out of a secure room in Arthur's penthouse, separate from my living quarters. They were led by the same sharp-eyed woman I had met in Hayes's office. For a week. The only sound was the quiet click of keyboards and the soft hum of high-end processors. They started with the documents I had photographed. Project Labyrinth, as they suspected, was a complete fabrication, a ghost project. It had no product, no client, no deliverables. It was a black hole designed for one purpose, to absorb millions of dollars. But it was so much worse than we thought. He taught her this, the lead accountant told me on the third day, pointing to a name on her screen. Richter. He's been running smaller scams like this for 5 years. But when he started his affair with Brenda, he got greedy. He gave her the template. She showed me the web. It was intricate. Fake invoices from shell companies in 3 different states. The money was wired, then wired again, split into smaller, untraceable amounts, and finally deposited into offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. An account in Brenda's maiden name, an account in Richter's. They had stolen nearly $20 million. Brenda's entire star career at Oracle, the career she had built her identity on, was a lie. Her profitable new clients were the ghost projects she and Richter had created. She wasn't just an executive, she was a parasite, draining the company from the inside. And she had been so arrogant as to bring the proof of it into her own home, where I was busy scrubbing her floors. The final report was bound in simple, black leather. It was 3 inches thick. It contained every email, every wire transfer, every fake invoice, and a full, undeniable trace on the flow of money. It was a death warrant. The accountant placed it on Arthur's desk in front of me. She did not smile. "It's complete, Mrs. Vance. We have everything. It is irrefutable." I opened the report. I saw the dates. I saw the amounts. I saw the signatures. I saw the photographs of Brenda and Richter at their hotel, their affair unknowingly documenting their conspiracy. I closed the cover. I thought of the broken glass. I thought of my son's weak, pleading eyes as he handed me $200. I thought of the cold park bench. I looked up at Hayes, who had joined us. "It is time," I said. "Call the board, call the SEC, and find out when Brenda's next big presentation is. I want an audience." The grand ballroom at the Austin Hyatt was a sea of corporate self-congratulation. There must have been 600 employees, all buzzing, sipping champagne at 10 in the morning. Oracle was celebrating its record-breaking quarter. A quarter built on the $20 million Brenda and Alan Richter had stolen. I stood in the wings, stage left. The air was cold, but I felt nothing. Julian Hayes stood beside me, a reassuring, solid presence. He checked his timepiece. "She's on after this," he murmured, the triumphant hero. I watched my son. Mark was in the front row, a seat reserved for executive partners. He looked ecstatic. He wore a new suit. His hair was perfectly styled, and he was beaming at the stage, waiting for his wife. He looked like a proud puppy, oblivious to the fact that his world was about to be put down. The lights dimmed. A slick, obnoxious video package began to play on the massive LED screen that formed the backdrop of the stage. It was a tribute to Brenda. A true visionary, the CEO's voiceover boomed. The architect of our new market dominance, the woman who drove Project Labyrinth to success. I am thrilled to give the stage to our senior vice president, our star, Brenda Vance. The room exploded in applause. Music pulsed. Brenda walked out onto the stage, and she was glowing. She wore a severe, expensive-looking white dress. She looked powerful, untouchable. She raised her hands, accepting the adulation like a queen. This was the pinnacle of her life, the very peak of the mountain. She fed on their applause, her smile wide and dazzling. She spotted Mark, and her smile became, if possible, even more arrogant. She stepped to the sleek, glass podium. She tapped the microphone. The room fell silent. "Thank you," she said, her voice smooth and confident. "Thank you all. We did it. When I look at what we've achieved with Project Labyrinth, I She never finished the sentence. On Hayes's cue, our technician cut the feed. The giant screen behind her, the one with her triumphant graphs, flickered, went black, and then lit up with a single, stark, white image. It was not the Oracore logo. It was the stylized scales of justice, the emblem of Hayes, Blackwood, and Associates. A collective gasp went through the room. Brenda stopped mid-word. She faltered, turning to look at the screen. Her confident smile wavered. I think we're having a technical issue, she stammered, tapping her earpiece. Can we? There is no technical issue, Ms. Vance. Julian Hayes walked onto the stage from the opposite side. He moved with a deliberate, unhurried pace. He carried his own microphone. He did not look at her. He looked at the audience. Who are you? Brenda snapped, her voice losing its polish. This is a private corporate meeting. Security. Hayes stopped at the center of the stage. He allowed a thin, cold smile. My apologies for the interruption. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Julian Hayes. I am acting as special counsel for the Board of Directors of Oracore. The words, Board of Directors, silenced the room instantly. There has been a pressing, internal matter. Hayes continued, his voice calm and authoritative, filling the ballroom. As many of you know, this company was founded by 3 partners. One of those partners, the architectural genius behind your entire platform, was Arthur Vance. I watched Brenda's face. The name hit her like a slap. Upon Mr. Vance's passing 8 months ago, Hayes said, his controlling founder's share in this company, the single largest stake, was activated. The board has been, until very recently, unaware of the heir's identity. He paused, letting the silence and anticipation build to an unbearable level. Today, that ends. It is my profound honor to introduce the new permanent voting member of your board of directors and your new largest shareholder. Please welcome the heir to the Vance legacy, Mrs. Eleanor Vance. He turned and gestured directly to me. I stepped out of the darkness. I stepped into the light. The first thing they would have heard was the sound. My heels. Hard leather on the polished stage. Click, click, click. A sound that cut through the silence. I was wearing a custom-tailored suit of the deepest navy blue. My silver hair was sharp and perfect. I walked past Hayes and took the second microphone from his hand. I did not look at the 600 stunned faces in the crowd. I looked at Brenda. She was a statue. The blood had drained from her face, leaving her expensive makeup looking like a grotesque mask. Her mouth was half open, her eyes wide with a dawning, animalistic terror. She saw me. She saw the woman she had hit with tongs, the woman she had called worthless, the woman she had thrown into the street. But that was not the woman standing before her. Then, I let my gaze travel to the front row, to my son. Mark had half risen from his chair, his face a mask of utter, uncomprehending shock. He was squinting, as if his brain could not process the data. I met his eyes. His hand, the one holding his phone, went slack. The device slipped from his grasp and clattered onto the floor, the sound echoing in the vast, dead silent ballroom. I raised the microphone. The metal was cool in my hand. My voice, when it came out, was not the thin, reedy whisper of Eleanor in the kitchen. It was amplified, clear and steady. It held the authority of the boardroom. Thank you, Mr. Hayes. I said, addressing the audience of 600 stunned employees. As the newest member of this board of directors, my first official duty is a simple one. It is to protect the assets of this corporation. I turned my head, slowly, until my eyes locked with Brenda's. She was frozen, her face a pale, horrified mask. And to remove the parasites. What is this? Brenda stammered, her voice a shadow of the booming confidence she'd had moments before. This is slander, you crazy old woman, security. Is it? I asked. I nodded to the technician in the wings. The haze, Blackwood, and Associates logo vanished. It was replaced by something else. Not a sales projection. It was a flowchart. A very complex, very detailed flowchart. It showed shell companies incorporated in Delaware and Nevada. It showed account numbers in the Cayman Islands. It showed payment dates, authorization codes, and 2 names: Brenda Vance, Alan Richter. This, I announced, my voice filling the ballroom, is the real Project Labyrinth. Not the fantasy of new clients you sold to the board, but a ghost project designed by you and Mr. Richter to embezzle funds, $20 million, to be exact. The screen changed. An email. A.R. to B.V. Labyrinth distribution complete. Brenda looked desperately into the crowd for the CFO, for her lover. But Alan Richter was already being quietly detained near the main exit. My daughter-in-law, I continued, believed my late husband, Arthur, was a simpleton, a humble engineer who worked for a tiny, unimportant firm called Nexus Solutions. I let the name hang in the air. What she did not know, what she was not smart enough to find out, was that Nexus Solutions was my husband's private auditing firm, and for the last year of his life, Nexus Solutions has been quietly investigating a massive fraud ring inside Oracle. Arthur knew. He knew about the theft. He knew about the affair. I walked closer to her, to the edge of the stage. My husband knew my son was weak, and he knew that you, Brenda, were a viper. He was just waiting for the right moment to protect his legacy. But he died before he could finish the job. I stood directly over her now, a queen addressing a peasant. So, I am here to finish it. No, she finally shrieked, the sound tearing through the room. No, she's lying. She's senile. We threw her out. She's a homeless old woman. She's a liar. She's lying. I said nothing. I simply raised my left hand in a small, deliberate gesture. From the second row, 2 men and a woman, all in dark, conservative suits, stood up. They were not employees. They were plainclothes federal agents. They mounted the steps to the stage. Ms. Brenda Vance, the lead agent said, his voice quiet but firm, holding up a badge. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, embezzlement, and large-scale financial crimes. They moved to her. She fought, trying to pull her arm back. Get off of me. No, Mark. Don't just stand there. Do something. Say something. All eyes turned to my son. Mark was on his feet, his face the color of ash, vibrating with terror. He looked from the agents handcuffing his wife to me, standing there with the microphone. His eyes were wide, wet, and pleading. The same eyes he had when he was 8 years old and had broken my favorite vase. Mom, he whispered, his voice cracking. Mom, please. I didn't know. I didn't know about this. The fraud. I swear. Mom, I didn't. Please. Don't let them. I looked at him. My son. The man who had stood silent while I was burned. The man who had chosen a monster over his own mother. The man who had handed me $200 and sent me into the darkness. I raised the microphone to my lips one last time. My voice was cold, and it was final. I spoke to him. But I made sure every person in that ballroom, every person on his team, every person he admired, heard me. And as for Mr. Mark Vance, I said, the words echoing. The man who was complicit in the fraudulent sale of my home and the theft of my assets. The man who stood by and watched. You are also fired. Effective immediately. I paused, letting the words land. Mr. Hayes and his civil team will see you in court. Mark didn't just sit. He collapsed into his chair, a hollowed-out shell. Brenda was wailing as they led her off the stage, past her stunned colleagues, her white dress now a symbol of her ruin. The room was in chaos. People were shouting, filming, gasping. I stood there, alone on the stage, in the silence of the storm's eye. I reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out the small, undamaged photo of Arthur I now carried everywhere. I looked at his kind, smiling face. I smiled. They were wrong, my love, I whispered, just for him. You didn't leave me nothing. You left me everything. Thank you all so much for listening. Let me know where you're tuning in from in the comments so we can all connect and share our thoughts. Please subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, give this video a like, and hit that hype button to help this story reach more people who need to hear it.